We're coming into a new year, so let's talk about setting intentions. I'm not very traditional, so I don't always celebrate New Year's, and I don't always set New Year's intentions. Since I'm constantly in a process of growing and evolving, I set intentions spontaneously whenever I'm inspired to do so, and that tends to be all throughout the year. But last year, one of my intentions for the new year was to start sharing my insights through videos like this one, and I had intended to do that with some consistency. And for most of the year, I posted about one video a week, but somewhere along the way it fizzled out. It's now been about 3 months since my last video, and here we are about to enter a new year, and I thought, what better time to reset that intention by posting another video? And will I stay consistent this time? Well, I can't make any promises. One of the things I want to talk about is the difference between a resolution and an intention, and why I think it's better to set intentions. When it comes to New Year's resolutions, how many of us actually follow through? It seems more often than not that we either fall back into old patterns, or we say we're going to do something and then it just never happens. And it might be that each year we make the same resolutions, only to fail at carrying them out. Now, I'm guilty of this myself, which is why I prefer to set intentions rather than resolutions. So what's the difference? A resolution is a firm determination to do something or not to do something. It's like a strict promise or a vow, and while that may seem like the best way to go about pursuing a goal, it can create a great deal of pressure. And the thing about pressure is that it can crush you. Intentions are a little softer and sometimes less specific to outcome. There's more room for forgiveness with an intention than there is with a promise, and this is why I don't make promises. If I promise to do something, I'm essentially saying that it's absolutely going to happen. But the reality is that I can't foresee the future, and I don't have that kind of control over the universe. There could be unforeseen circumstances that might prevent me from following through, or I could simply change my mind. But if I make an intention, there's more flexibility. It means I'm going to move toward a general outcome, but I may not necessarily arrive at that outcome, or I may not arrive within a specific time frame, and that's okay. The thing with intentions is that there's no pressure, and therefore no stress, which means you can relax. And in my experience, it's easier for me to do something when I'm relaxed. Things flow more smoothly and effortlessly. But if I'm under pressure, I feel rushed, which means it's more likely that I'll make a hasty decision or a mistake, or I'll just feel overwhelmed and I give up quickly. Now, the thing about resolutions is that they're typically things that we feel we should do, rather than things we feel naturally inspired to do, and so we're imposing something upon ourselves, usually an action or a change in behavior. Intentions, on the other hand, start from within and then have an effect on our outward behavior. Again, intentions are typically inspired rather than forced, and this gives them greater influence in our lives. So when it comes to setting intentions, really it's about listening to what's in your heart, listening to your own inner wisdom. It's not about overthinking, and it's not about what you think you should do or what anyone else thinks you should do. The other distinction between a resolution and an intention is that resolutions tend to be specific to detail, whereas intentions are more general. And I've observed in my own life that when I make a rigid plan and one of the details doesn't work out, it can throw the whole thing out of whack. But if I'm less specific, that means I have a general idea of what I'm moving toward, and I'll figure out the details as I go along. This allows me to be more open to options I hadn't previously considered, and even to change course completely if I discover along the way that I want to take things in a different direction. Another thing to consider when making intentions is to keep it to yourself, particularly if you have a big goal in mind. I noticed that most people have a tendency to share their goals with others, and this is especially true these days with social media. But there have been some psychological studies that suggest that a person who tells others their goal is less likely to follow through with it. Now, that may seem counterintuitive. You would think that if you tell someone your goal, you'll be more likely to follow through because they're going to hold you accountable. And while this does seem to make a lot of sense in theory, the research shows otherwise. And the reason is that when you accomplish a goal, there's a certain sense of fulfillment and satisfaction, and it's the anticipation of that feeling which is often the driving force behind the pursuit. But you can also feel that same sense of satisfaction simply by telling someone your goal. And once you've experienced that feeling, there's no longer such a strong inclination to pursue the goal itself. You've already experienced the feeling simply by talking about it. So this may explain one reason why we don't always follow through on our plans. Another reason we may have difficulty following through is that we may try to take on too much at once. Again, intention isn't the same as taking action. The actions need to arise naturally and spontaneously. It's not about trying to force anything, but rather allowing inspiration to gently guide us. When we make New Year's resolutions, we typically try to completely restructure our life from day one, and that usually doesn't last long. The thing about habits is that they become wired into us. And that doesn't mean that we can't rewire them, but sometimes we try to rewire the entire system all at once, and we end up getting burned out. We have this idea that we're going to live the entire new year completely differently, and that means rearranging everything at the start of the year. But the way I see it is that we have the entire year to shift our patterns, not that we should expect our lives to be completely different from the start, but rather that from the start, we're going to consciously begin shifting toward a higher quality of living. This gives us time to shift gradually, which takes off so much of the pressure. And when we take a leap, there's a greater chance of falling, but when we simply take things one step at a time, it gives us time to find our footing, to adjust and prepare for the next step. So make sure to keep your focus in the present. If we're walking in a particular direction and our focus is locked on the destination, that means that we're not watching where we step. And if we're not watching where we step, we could easily trip and fall. So it's better to keep your eye on the path right in front of you and to be present with the journey. So to recap, consider making inspired intentions rather than imposed resolutions. If you're setting a goal, consider keeping it to yourself rather than sharing it with others. And take small steps toward change rather than trying to take on too much at once. And with that, I wish you all the best in this new year to come.